Grandma chose me over the golden child, and my family lost their minds. They tried lies, threats, and even legal action to take my inheritance. But I walked away and never looked back. I don't know if I should feel vindicated, heartbroken, or just plain exhausted. Maybe all three. I never thought I'd be the one to break away from my family, but here I am, staring at the ashes of whatever connection we had left. They always told me that family is everything. Funny how that only seemed to apply when they needed something from me. Growing up, I was the afterthought, the extra, the inconvenient second child that my parents barely acknowledged unless they needed someone to blame. My older brother, David, was their golden boy. He could do no wrong, and even when he did, they found ways to twist reality to make it seem like he was still perfect. He got the best clothes, the newest gadgets, the full ride to a prestigious university, funded entirely by my parents. I got hand-me-downs, second-hand school supplies, and a figure-it-out-yourself attitude when I asked for help. When he got in trouble at school, it was boys will be boys. When I so much as raised my voice in frustration, I was difficult and ungrateful. They never missed a single one of his basketball games, but my high school graduation, they showed up late, didn't take a single picture, and left before I could even say goodbye to my friends. I tried. God, I tried so hard to be good enough for them. I got good grades, stayed out of trouble, even tried to bond with David despite the blatant favoritism. But it didn't matter. They had already decided my place in the family, and I was never going to be anything more than a supporting character in the David show. The only person who ever made me feel like I mattered was my grandmother. She wasn't flashy or loud, but she had this way of making me feel seen, really seen. When I talked, she listened. Actually listened, not just waited for her turn to speak. She remembered the little things, like how I liked my coffee, or the way I always doodled in the margins of my notebooks. When I felt invisible, she reminded me I wasn't. She was the one who encouraged me to follow my own path, to go to college even when my parents scoffed at the idea of wasting money on me. She helped me out in ways I didn't even realize until much later, quietly slipping me money for books, sending me care packages when I was struggling, and calling me just to hear about my day. When she got sick, I was the only one who stayed by her side. My parents and David visited when it was convenient, but I was the one who held her hand during the long nights, who made sure she wasn't alone in those last weeks. When she passed, I was devastated. Losing her felt like losing the only real family I had. But then came the will. I hadn't expected anything. I would have been grateful just to have one of her old sweaters, something to remember her by. But as it turned out, she left everything to me. Everything. Her house, her savings, even her old jewelry, things I had never even thought about. She had set up a trust in my name, making sure that no one could touch it but me. I was stunned. My family? Furious. At first, they played nice. My mother started calling me sweetheart and inviting me over for dinner. My father suddenly wanted to catch up after years of barely acknowledging my existence. David, who had never so much as asked me about my life, was suddenly my best friend, reminiscing about our great childhood together. It was so fake, I could practically taste the desperation. Then came the guilt trips, the family values speeches, the long talks about how we all need to stick together, and how Grandma wouldn't want us to fight. My mother cried. My father lectured. David acted like he was entitled to half of everything because we're siblings. When I told them I wasn't sharing the inheritance, the mask slipped. My mother accused me of being selfish, of betraying the family. My father called me ungrateful and said I was turning my back on the people who raised me. David? He flat out told me that I didn't deserve anything, that Grandma must have been senile when she wrote her will. They tried everything. Manipulation, gaslighting, even straight-up threats. My father hinted at legal action, saying they'd fight the will. My mother tried the whole, but were struggling financially routine, as if that had ever mattered when I was barely scraping by on my own. And David had the audacity to tell me that I was ruining his life because he had been counting on that money for his future. I laughed. I actually laughed, because for once, I was holding the cards. For once, they couldn't take something from me. So I told them no. No, I wasn't giving them a dime. No, I wasn't going to let them guilt me into handing over what my grandmother left me. No, I wasn't going to play the role of the dutiful, forgotten child anymore. They exploded, but I didn't back down. And now? Now they've cut me off. They say I'm dead to them. My mother sent one final message telling me she hopes I regret this when I'm all alone in the world. But the thing is, I've always been alone with them. After I told them no, After I refused to hand over the inheritance my grandmother had left me, the fallout was immediate. It was like a dam broke, releasing years of resentment, anger, and entitlement that they had carefully hidden behind fake smiles and empty words. At first, they tried to play it off as if I was just being stubborn, as if I would come to my senses and do the right thing. My mother kept texting me, sending long-winded messages about family unity and how Grandma would have wanted me to share. She must have forgotten that I actually knew Grandma better than any of them. If she wanted them to have anything, she would have put it in the will. Then the calls started. First from my father, then from David. Each time, they tried a different tactic. My father opened with guilt. "You're really going to watch your own parents struggle while you sit on a fortune? Do you have any idea how much we sacrificed for you?" That one made me laugh. What sacrifices? They never helped me with school, never encouraged me, never gave me a dime when I was struggling. I had to work through college while David got everything handed to him. When I reminded him of that, his response was, "Well, that was different." Different how? Because it wasn't him struggling? Because it wasn't his future on the line? David, on the other hand, went straight for the anger. "You're a selfish bitch," he spat at me over the phone. "You don't even need that money. You're just hoarding it to spite us." Spite? Spite? I worked my ass off to survive without their help. They let me struggle, let me scrape by while they pampered David and set him up for success. Now, they had the nerve to act like I was the one being unfair? I hung up on him. Then my mother showed up at my door. I should have known she wouldn't let this go easily, but I didn't expect her to literally drive to my apartment and bang on my door like a debt collector. "Open the door. We need to talk." I didn't. I sat there, heart pounding, phone in my hand as I debated whether to just call the police and be done with it. But part of me, some stupid, naive part of me, thought maybe she would calm down. Maybe she would finally see reason. She didn't. She sat outside my door for 3 hours. I could hear her through the thin walls, going through a whole spectrum of emotions. First, she was sad, crying, saying she just wanted to fix this. Then she was mad, muttering about how I was throwing my family away and how I would end up alone. Then, finally, the truth came out. "You don't deserve any of it." That was the moment I knew there was no fixing this. She wasn't hurt because I had betrayed them. She was hurt because, for the first time, she couldn't control me. She was angry because she expected me to roll over and give them what they wanted. Because that's what I was supposed to do. I was supposed to be the forgotten one, the extra, the one who worked hard while David reaped the rewards. Except I wasn't playing that game anymore. I didn't open the door. And eventually, she left. The silence that followed was both terrifying and freeing. They stopped calling, stopped texting, stopped pretending. For the first time in my life, I was truly alone. And somehow, that was less painful than being surrounded by people who never actually loved me. I thought that was the end of it, that they would stew in their anger, throw around some insults, and then move on. But I underestimated just how entitled they truly were. A week after my mother's dramatic doorstep meltdown, I got a letter from a lawyer. At first, I thought it was a joke, some kind of scam. But no, my family was officially threatening to sue me. According to the letter, they were contesting my grandmother's will. Their argument? That I had coerced her into cutting them out. That I had manipulated a frail, elderly woman into leaving everything to me. And because they were her true heirs, they were demanding their fair share. I actually laughed when I read it. They had nothing. No proof. No legal ground. Just pure desperation. Still, I wasn't going to take chances. I immediately called my grandmother's lawyer, the one who had helped her draft her will. And when I explained the situation, he just sighed. "They don't have a case," he assured me. "But that won't stop them from making your life difficult." And he was right. For the next few months, my family waged war on me. It started with letters and emails. Angry, self-righteous, manipulative messages trying every trick in the book to get me to cave. "Your grandmother was confused when she wrote that will. You know she would have wanted us all to share. Do you really want to be responsible for tearing this family apart? You don't even need all that money. Why are you being so greedy?" When I ignored those, they escalated. I started getting phone calls from relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. Some tried to be subtle, gently urging me to do the right thing. Others were outright hostile, calling me a gold-digging bitch who was ruining the family. One particularly unhinged cousin even messaged me on Facebook saying, "Enjoy your blood money. Hope it keeps you warm when you're all alone." Which was funny, because these people had spent my entire life making sure I felt alone. What exactly had changed now? One night, I got a call from my father. I don't know why I answered. Maybe part of me wanted to believe he had come to his senses. Spoiler, he hadn't. He went straight to guilt mode. "You're really going to watch your own parents struggle while you sit on a fortune?" he asked, his voice thick with faux disappointment. "You mean the same parents who never helped me when I was struggling?" I shot back. "That's different," he said immediately. Of course it was. I hung up. The next morning, my mother sent me a text. "You're dead to us." After my mother sent that final text, something inside me shifted. I expected to feel sadness, maybe even regret, but all I felt was a weight lifting off my chest. For the first time in my life, I wasn't desperately clinging to people who had never truly loved me. I was free, but of course, they weren't done yet. A month passed. Silence. Then, just when I thought they had finally accepted defeat, I got a call from an unknown number. I don't usually answer those, but I picked up without thinking. "Hello?" A familiar voice broke into a sob. It was my mother. "Sweetheart, please," she whispered. "I know things got out of hand, but we're family. Can we talk?" My stomach clenched. I should have hung up. I knew better. But there was still a tiny, broken part of me that wanted to believe she cared. So I listened. She launched into a whole dramatic speech about how she missed me, how she loved me, how family should stick together. "We're struggling, sweetheart," she finally admitted. "We might lose the house. I don't know what to do." There it was. The real reason she was calling. She wasn't sorry. She didn't love me. She just wanted my money. I took a deep breath. "Mom, let me ask you something." "What, sweetheart?" Her voice was soft, hopeful. "If Grandma had split the inheritance evenly, would you have given me a single dime of your share?" Silence. Then, "That's different." Of course it was. I hung up, and this time, I blocked her number. Once the legal drama finally ended and my family was officially out of my life, I had a realization. I had spent so much time fighting to keep what was rightfully mine that I hadn't even stopped to think, what do I want to do with it? For the first time in my life, I had resources, choices, freedom. So, I started fresh. I bought a house, a cozy, peaceful place that was mine and mine alone. No bad memories. No ghosts of my past. I put myself through therapy, untangling years of emotional neglect and manipulation. I started traveling, seeing parts of the world I never imagined I'd visit. And most importantly, I finally stopped feeling guilty. They had spent my entire life making me feel like I was nothing. But I wasn't nothing. I was somebody. And I was done letting them take anything else from me. Then, after nearly a year of silence, I got a message from David. Ignoring David's message should have been the end of it. But entitled people never take silence as an answer. A few days later, another message arrived, longer and filled with forced sincerity. He tried to act like a wounded brother longing for reconciliation, but it was clear he wanted something. The messages kept coming, shifting from polite to desperate to guilt-tripping. When I blocked his number, emails started. When I ignored those, the calls began. Then, he showed up at my house. I came home one evening to find him standing on my porch. He looked disheveled, nothing like the confident golden child I had grown up with. There was no arrogance, just desperation. His life had fallen apart. Our parents, who had always supported him, were broke. The house was gone. His wife had left him after discovering his affairs, taking the kids. Then, he lost his job. For the first time in his life, he had no safety net. That was why he was there, expecting me to fix everything like everyone else had before. He did not acknowledge the years of mistreatment, the favoritism, or the cruelty. In his mind, I was still the lesser sibling, the one who should step aside and help. He was used to people sacrificing for him, and now, he expected me to do the same. But I was not that person anymore. Without a word, I walked past him, entered my house, and shut the door. Through the peephole, I watched as he stood there, stunned. He truly believed I would take him in. Minutes passed before he finally left, walking slowly, as if he had only just realized that, for the first time, someone had told him no. The messages that followed were filled with anger. He called me selfish, heartless, a terrible sibling. When insults failed, he tried guilt. He told me our parents were struggling, that they needed me. But David had abandoned them the moment they had nothing left to give. Now, he expected me to be the savior, the child they had never cared about until they needed something. His final message went unanswered. It had never been my responsibility to fix what they had broken. It never would be. David's messages eventually stopped, but the silence did not last long. Soon, my parents took their turn. It started with emails, carefully worded to seem warm and affectionate, as if the past had never happened. They asked how I had been, talked about family, and hinted at how much they missed me. But their true intentions were obvious. They were not reaching out because they cared, they were reaching out because they were desperate. Their financial downfall had been swift. Without the inheritance they had expected to rely on, they had been forced to face the consequences of their reckless spending. Years of bad financial decisions had caught up to them, and now, with no house, no savings, and no lifeline, they had nowhere left to turn. David had already failed them. Now, they were hoping I would step in to clean up the mess. When I ignored the emails, the manipulation started. They sent messages about their declining health, the stress they were under, and how hard life had been for them. They painted themselves as victims, carefully leaving out the years of neglect and favoritism. When that failed, they turned to guilt, saying that no matter what had happened in the past, they were still my parents, and family was all that mattered. But I had spent my entire life being treated as disposable. I had spent years trying to earn their love, only to be pushed aside in favor of David. Now that they needed me, they expected everything to be forgotten. They expected me to be the dutiful child, the one who would swoop in and save them. I did not respond. The final email came weeks later. It was short, direct, and filled with anger. They called me selfish, ungrateful, and accused me of abandoning them in their time of need. But the truth was, they had abandoned me first. I blocked their emails. Blocking their emails should have been the end of it, but my parents never accepted rejection. They escalated. Letters started arriving at my house, carefully worded attempts to manipulate me back into their control. Some were long and nostalgic, pretending the past never happened. Others were short, bitter, and angry, blaming me for their struggles. I never read them. I tossed them straight into the trash. When letters failed, they showed up in person. One evening, I saw them through the window before they even knocked. My mother looked older, exhausted, as if the weight of her choices had finally caught up to her. My father stood stiffly beside her, his usual authority stripped away. They knocked once, then again, then called my name, waiting for an answer that would never come. I stood behind the door, arms crossed, heart steady. The old version of me would have cracked, would have opened the door and let them back in. But that version of me didn't exist anymore. I owed them nothing. Minutes passed before they finally gave up. They stood there for a moment, hesitating, as if expecting me to change my mind at the last second. But I didn't. Eventually, they walked away. They didn't leave a note. They didn't force their way in. Maybe, for the first time in their lives, they understood they had no power over me anymore. It was a strange feeling, watching them leave. There was no guilt, no sadness, no urge to chase after them. Just quiet, steady certainty. They had made their choices. Now, they were facing the consequences. That was the last time I ever saw them. After my parents left my doorstep for the last time, I expected them to try again. They always had a way of pushing until they got what they wanted. But this time, nothing happened. No more letters, no more emails, no more unexpected visits. It was as if they had finally accepted defeat. At first, I felt relief. No more battles, no more justifications, no more being treated like a backup plan. But then, something unexpected happened. A distant cousin reached out, claiming my parents had been telling everyone that I had abandoned them in their time of need. The story had spread through the family like wildfire. In their version of events, I was the selfish child who had turned my back on them when they needed me most. They made no mention of the years of favoritism, the neglect, or how they had only come to me when they had no other options. Relatives I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly had opinions about me. Some sent messages urging me to reconsider, talking about the importance of family. Others outright insulted me, calling me ungrateful and heartless. It was incredible how people who had never once checked on me before suddenly cared so much about what I owed to my parents. I didn't respond. Blocking people became second nature. Anyone who tried to guilt me, manipulate me, or pressure me into contact was cut off without hesitation. I had spent too much of my life letting people walk all over me. That was over. The silence stretched on, and over time, their outrage faded. People moved on, found new gossip, and the messages slowed. My parents had burned through all their bridges. There was no one left for them to turn to. They had expected me to be their last option, but I had closed that door forever. Months passed with no contact. The flood of messages slowed, then stopped. My parents had disappeared from my life, and I had stopped expecting another attempt from them. The relatives who had harassed me eventually moved on to their own problems. It was as if my family had collectively decided to erase me. There was no more manipulation, no more guilt tripping. For the first time in my life, I was completely free from them. Then, out of nowhere, I received an email. The subject line was simple: "Please come home." It was from my mother. I stared at it for a long time, debating whether to open it. A part of me already knew what it would say. It wouldn't be an apology. It wouldn't be an acknowledgement of what they had done to me. It would be another plea, another desperate attempt to drag me back. Curiosity won. I opened it. The message was short, almost clinical. My father's health was failing. They were struggling financially. They needed me. No details, no warmth, no regret. Just another attempt to guilt me into taking responsibility for people who had never cared about me until they had no other choice. There was no mention of the years of neglect, the favoritism, or how they had never once supported me when I was the one struggling. It was written as if none of that had ever happened, as if I was still just an extension of their needs, someone to be summoned when convenient. For a brief moment, I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, no satisfaction, just emptiness. If they had sent this message years ago, it might have worked. If I had still been the desperate child who had spent a lifetime chasing their love, I might have broken down and given them exactly what they wanted. But that person was gone. I had grieved this relationship long before they had even realized they had lost me. I closed the email. I didn't respond. I didn't hesitate. I deleted it. Then, I blocked their email. And for the first time, I knew there was nothing left to be said. After deleting my mother's email, I expected to feel something: anger, sadness, even guilt. But I felt nothing. No part of me hesitated. No small voice in my head told me to reconsider. There was no urge to explain myself, no lingering doubt that maybe I was being too harsh. Just a quiet certainty that I had made the right choice. I had spent years waiting for them to change, hoping for some recognition, some acknowledgement that I had been treated unfairly. But that moment was never going to come. They had never seen me as their equal, never truly cared about my struggles, and never thought they owed me anything. Now, when they had lost everything, they still refused to take responsibility. In their minds, I was still just a resource, something to be used and discarded when convenient. That chapter of my life was over. I poured my energy into building something for myself. The inheritance my grandmother had left me became the foundation of a life that was truly mine. I used it wisely, investing in things that gave me security and peace. I bought a home, not a mansion or something extravagant, but a place that was safe, comfortable, and mine alone. I went to therapy, unlearning years of manipulation, breaking free from the guilt that had been drilled into me since childhood. I traveled, explored, met new people, and slowly started to understand what it meant to live without the weight of my family on my shoulders. Every now and then, I would wonder where they were, what had happened to them after they realized I was never coming back. But I never looked them up, never reached out. Some bridges deserve to stay burned. One day, I received a message from a distant relative I hadn't blocked. It was short, almost casual, as if they weren't sure if they should even tell me. My father had passed away. My mother was still struggling, still trying to find someone to take care of her. David had vanished, leaving her behind, just as he had always done when things got hard. I read the message once, then deleted it. There was no relief, no sadness, no satisfaction, just the quiet confirmation that I had made the right decision. I moved on, because in the end, I had already mourned them long ago.